Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dime Sportsbook and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 192 event, which takes place in Houston, Texas. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 75 went 0-1 to lose 3.3 units overall. We only had one premium play on Roger Zapata, and he lost via injury TKO. Thankfully, our free bet on the Barnett Nelson over 1.5 rounds total profited 1 unit. Back to the present, UFC 192 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass is a lightweight contest between Francisco Trevino, who is 12-1, and UFC newcomer Sage Northcutt, who is 5-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Northcutt minus 230 to come back on Trevino plus 170. Right now, looking over at 5dimes.eu, our official sponsor for the sportsbook lines here. It is now Northcutt minus 440 to come back on Trevino is plus 350. So, especially the last couple days, significant action has been coming on Northcutt. A lot of people adding him to parlays, a lot of straight bets included as well. So, Northcutt is the side. Now, of course, a quick background story for those of you guys that might not know. Northcutt has a tremendous amount of hype around him. I mean, he's only 19 years old and the UFC signed him with not a lot of pure MMA experience. I mean, he's got a little bit of an amateur background, but he's only 5-0. And he's basically a young prospect with tons of hype coming out of Legacy Fighting. And he was a standout in that organization as well. He's got the looks, he's got the build, he's got the athleticism. I mean, the kid really has potential to be a superstar. And he is really a well-rounded martial artist as well. He's basically a point karate and kickboxing champion that's turned to MMA, and he's really been working hard on his wrestling and his BJJ and, you know, training to become a complete mixed martial artist. And it shows that he really has. Again, my question mark or my concern about Northcutt really is the level of competition he's faced thus far throughout his career. Now, of course, at 19 and transitioning from kickboxing and karate, the stand-up skill sport, to MMA, you're going to kind of take things easy. So I agree with the way they kind of brought him up. But now all of a sudden he's going to kind of get thrown into the deep water here into UFC. Even though they've tried to match him up favorably for him here against Trevino, it's definitely a winnable fight for Northcutt. But it's a tough one because Trevino is by far the best fighter that Northcutt's ever faced. And Trevino is a little bit sneaky in some of his skill as well, which we'll all get into here in a minute. But back to Northcutt overall, I mean, he's just a natural athlete. He's already developed a lot of skill in wrestling, BJJ. He's able to finish the fight on the ground or even by standing up by KO as well. So the kid's a flashy striker. He's got actually pretty good wrestling. Like I said, he takes the fight to the floor when he wants to, and he's improving. I mean, fight by fight, the kid is definitely getting better. But now getting over to Trevino real quick, he's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He trains with Makhachev and crew over there. Basically from Brazil, but out of, you know, the Texas camp that they got going over there, which is actually a pretty solid training environment for Trevino as well. It's a little bit underrated, probably, that group of fighters that they have, that stable over there. So he is known for more of a striking-based fighter, Trevino is as well, but he's a pretty underrated, well-rounded fighter in his own right. He's tough. He's not easy to finish, not easy to sub. And offensively and defensively, he's really sound on the ground as well. I mean, he attacks with submissions, has good reversals on the ground as well. So this is the thing. Northcutt's going to have an advantage, I think, across the board here against Trevino in every category. But there is the question marks that Trevino definitely does have that toughness and definitely has the ability to make things difficult, especially on the ground, where Northcutt will probably end up shooting and looking for a takedown in this spot. I think Trevino is going to look to reverse or look to end this fight by submission too, because there's still some question marks surrounding Northcutt. Now, if this fight does hit the scorecards, I expect a pretty competitive decision, but you do have to lean a little bit towards Northcutt because I think he's going to be the more active fighter, the busier fighter throughout here as well. But this is definitely a tougher matchup, I think, than everybody going kind of crazy here and betting him thinking it's a shoe-in because, I mean, the UFC signed this kid. They matched him up to a winnable fight for him with Trevino. Just everything's kind of lining up for Northcutt in this spot. I don't necessarily have the confidence level that most of you guys do out there. I want to see this kid perform even against a guy like Trevino that he should beat. I think he will be tested. So I'm going to stay away and be an observer here in this spot. I think the line is getting carried away just slightly. So I'm picking Northcutt to win. I mean, I agree with the situation here, but I think that people are going to be surprised that Trevino actually gives him a fight.
Yeah, the hype behind Northcutt is getting a little bit out of control. I mean, the kid is a tremendous athlete. He's very good on the feet, very dynamic, really good kicking game, and he mixes it up on the ground. I mean, he's not a great ground fighter yet, but I mean, he can do anything in terms of getting the fight to the canvas. He can, slam you. He can get inside with a trip. He can shoot in a double leg. So far in his last 2 fights, he's displayed all of those takedowns. Granted, he hasn't faced anybody yet really of note. And while Trevino isn't, a real big stepping stone, I mean, he's still a UFC caliber guy, even if it is near the bottom. So Northcutt's definitely jumping right in, and Trevino should give him a bit of a test. He's a scrappy guy. He can get inside. He's not a terrible striker. He's got a decent ground game. So I expect him to get in Northcutt's face. I don't think he's just going to sit on the outside and let Northcutt do all kinds of crazy, flashy kicks. Northcutt, in terms of his striking ability, he does have really good push kicks, side kicks. I mean, he does uses those kicks a lot to create space. And then he has some power with his hands too, although I think you really got to be worried about the kicks when you're in there with him. He was able to pick up rear naked chokes in his last 2 fights, aggressively pursuing takedowns when he wasn't mixing it up on the feet. So he's just constantly attacking. So Trevino's going to have to kind of counter that and be aggressive right back at him. And we'll see how that plays out. Northcutt is definitely a very, very good athlete. And the age difference here is pretty extreme. Northcutt's only 19 years old. Trevino's about 32, 33. So Northcutt's got just a ton of confidence, and I expect him to come in there with that youthful exuberance and really just try to take this one over real quick. He might get a little surprised, though, if he can't put away Trevino. I mean, Trevino has gone to decision in both of his UFC fights so far, even against Johnny Case, who is a similar style fighter to Northcutt. He's just a little bit more refined. So we'll see how Northcutt does here. I mean, I do expect Trevino to put up a test, but I think Northcutt's going to pass this one. He's getting a ton of hype. They're even bringing him out for the open workouts. So they definitely want this kid to, step in there, perform admirably, and then they can start building him, because I think the UFC sees dollar signs with this kid's style. Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Derrick Lewis, who is 12-4 with 1 no contest, taking on Viktor Pesta, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Pesta minus 125, the comeback on Lewis minus 115. So virtually a pick 'em with a slight lean towards Pesta. Tough spot because really overall I'm not sure how much respect Pesta is really going to get. I know he performed really well in his last fight against Sorokin, so I think that probably brought his level of respect up a little bit, because right now over at 5 dimes it is Pesta minus 165. The comeback is plus 145. And looking across the Don Best screen, it's about 155, 160 on average out there as well. So the action or the line has moved towards Pesta just slightly. And you know what? I agree with it as far as overall in this fight, how they match up. I mean, both these guys are extremely powerful. Of course, Lewis is a little bit bigger and stronger, but Pesta is no slouch when it comes to strength area either. And I think he's actually the better overall athlete here. He does have athleticism. He's got more speed. He's younger by, I believe, 6 years or so as well. So there's some advantages to Pesta for sure. And again, he's starting to get that experience that he lacked before he made his UFC debut. Pesta, I think, needed to get a couple more solid wins, even though it wasn't bad. I mean, compared to some of the European fighters that you do come in see fighting in the UFC, or, fighters that are making their debuts. Like we were just talking about, for example, with Northcutt, Pesta actually did have a little bit of a better resume, but still not comparable to Lewis. So I think Pesta is getting that experience. He's getting that confidence because of his performances in the UFC. Even against Magomedov, he actually performed relatively well. He actually almost finished Magomedov early in that fight too. So Pesta is still a raw developing talent, whereas Lewis, I think he's kind of almost on his way out. I know he hasn't been in the UFC that long, but I mean, throughout his career, again, he's 30 years old, but he's just, I think, a little bit beyond that. I mean, as far as some of the wars he's been in, I mean, he hasn't been in the situation like some, maybe these guys, the throwbacks from Pride or anything like that have been in, but still, he's had his share of fights and some pretty tough fights along the way as well. So I think that Lewis has the power, has the strength to make things interesting for Pesta, especially if he ends up on the ground and on top, because that is one little question mark about Pesta. I mean, we've seen his wrestling, and it seems like it's actually not that bad. I mean, he gets top position. He's able to, shoot a good double leg. And once he's on top, Pesta's definitely hard to buck off and control a little bit. And he does have some decent ground and pound, but it's when Pesta's put on his back, which Lewis is definitely going to try at some point. And if Lewis gets on top and starts landing some nasty ground and pound, it's tough to get that guy off you. So that's a little bit of a concern here with this fight. If Lewis ends up on top, if they do go to the ground, Pesta might have some difficulty there. But on the feet, even though Lewis has some power, Pesta's honestly the better striker. He's got the better movement. I think he's going to be a little bit faster, and I think he's going to be able to land a little bit. And Lewis has obviously been knocked out 2 of his last 3 fights in the UFC as well. Pesta has enough power to make it knockout number 3, in my opinion. If it does hit the scorecards, I think Pesta will win a close decision as well. So Pesta showed a lot of toughness too. I got to mention this real quick before I wrap things up. In his last fight against Orokin, he actually got clipped. Orokin has a lot of power. He's known for that power. And he did get clipped, got wobbled a little bit, but he showed the toughness. I mean, he hung in there. He didn't give up. He didn't quit. He had that will to win, and I like that in him as well. So I think a lot of things looking good for Pesta in this fight. Now, again, he still has a long way to go to get into the upper tier heavyweight talk, in the UFC division right now. But I think Pesta is definitely on his way, and he'll improve fight by fight. So I'm going to go with Pesta. I think he does end up with a win here over Lewis.
Yeah, the biggest difference between these guys is actually chin strength to me, because Derrick Lewis, as big and strong and powerful as he is, I mean, the guy just cannot take a good punch. And while Pesta isn't a huge power guy, I mean, he did rock Magomedov in his UFC debut. So, I mean, the power is there. Pesta isn't a huge technique guy in terms of striking ability on the feet, but he is pretty good on the inside. If he can get in the clinch against Lewis without the fight going to the ground, I can see him grabbing the back of Lewis's head, hammering him with knees both to the body and to the head. Working that inside game. At open space, Pesta should be better as well. Lewis just is not a very good stand-up striker. He's been knocked out both times. His last 2 opponents wanted to keep him on the feet, and they were able to put him away. So Lewis really is at his best, just like Soa Palele, where you have to get your opponent to the ground, get on top of them, and then just start mashing them with punches from top position. That's where Lewis is at his best. I mean, he can put you out even in just regular guard, but he has to get there. And Pesta is a pretty competent grappler. I think Lewis, as big and strong as he isn't a great grappler. It's more that he just is able to get on top of people because he's able to overpower them. Now, Pesta is a little bit longer, a little bit taller, and even though he's giving up about 20 pounds, he should be able to hold his own in the grappling because I think he is the better overall grappler. Now, if Lewis is able to get on top of him, maybe he's able to get something going and put Pesta away, but Pesta has a chin. He has a really good chin. That guy took some huge shots from Orokin in his last fight and then came back and was able to get Orokin on the ground and just work him over. So I can see Pesta outstriking Lewis on the feet here. I can see Pesta avoiding being put on his back for any extended period of time. And I can see Pesta eventually taking Lewis down and working him over. I can't guarantee Pesta would get the finish, but I can at least, at worst, see him winning a decision here against Derrick Lewis. So I'm going to go with Viktor Pesta here. I think he's doing the right things. He's trained at Alliance before his last fight. He's been training with Alexander Gustafsson at the All-Stars gym in Sweden before this fight, so he should be plenty prepared for whatever Derrick Lewis has to offer, and I think Pesta picks this one up. Now, dropping all the way down to the flyweight division, we have Chris Cariaso, who is 17-7, taking on Sergio Pettis, who is 12-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Pettis minus 185, the comeback on Cariaso plus 145, and right now it's Pettis minus 170, Cariaso plus 150. Line margins tighten up a little bit. Two-way action coming in on this fight. Nothing significant either way. it is a tough fight. It's definitely a close fight as well because Cariaso, obviously, I mean, he's a skilled guy at 120, no doubt about it. He fought for the title. A lot of people could question that all they want, but the truth is, I mean, Cariaso has been a savvy vet for a long time in the sport here. I mean, a very well-rounded, tough as nails type of fighter that always brings it, not easy to dominate. I mean, if you're Demetrius Johnson, that's a story, but overall, I mean, Cariaso is definitely a tough out for most people, and I think that it is going to be for Pettis as well. But the UFC matched this fight again, I think, for a reason. I mean, Cariaso is now 34 years old. Pettis is only 22. And, I mean, the confidence level for most people out there right now, I think, is a question mark for Pettis' chin. So that's going to be the main issue here. But overall, how they match up, I mean, both these guys like to strike. I think the striking aspect of the game will definitely be close. It'll be competitive because Cariaso is a pretty good, talented striker in his own right. But I do think that Pettis is going to be a little bit faster. I think he can mix things up a little bit better. I think he is getting better fight by fight. That's the sad thing with Pettis. I mean, if you look, I think he's putting in a lot of hard work over a Rufus Sport, and he's come a long way. But again, it's that defense he needs to tighten up quite a bit, and that chin has kind of restricted him a little bit. So I think all of the improvements from Pettis has kind of been overlooked by his chin and some of his losses recently. So that doesn't really sit that well with me, but at the same time, Pettis is definitely a talented fighter. And in fact, I think you have to give him the stand-up edge here in this fight against Cariaso. I think you got to give him kind of the wrestling edge here as well. And then the jiu-jitsu edge to go along with it. I think he's a better sub fighter. So across the board, I think Pettis is actually a little bit better than Cariaso, but the advantage that Cariaso has in this fight is his toughness, is that he is a very tough guy to finish. I know he's got some sub losses along the way to pretty good submission fighters as well, but I think that overall Cariaso is just a tough out. So I think this fight probably does hit the scorecards. I think we're going to see a competitive decision, but I do think that Pettis is going to survive. He's not going to get knocked out. And this is a good matchup for the UFC to get him some respect back over a quality opponent like Cariaso. And then Pettis strings together maybe a couple more quality wins. You could talk about him possibly getting a title shot still down the line. So he's young enough, a lot of room to grow. I think we will still see a lot of great things from Pettis. And I think it probably starts here. He rebounds with the W over Cariaso.
Chris Cariaso, he's still a very dangerous guy. It's just his last two fights, he was thrown into the ringer with Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo. And then with Sergio, I mean, he just did not look great, at least at the end of that last fight against Ryan Benoit. He was starting strong and then just got a little too cocky, brawled a little bit, and then ate a big shot and got put out. And that is a huge question mark for Pettis going forward because, I mean, he's just 22 years old. Usually you see guys, with their chin starting to fade a little bit when they've been fighting for years and years and maybe they're in their late 20s, early 30s. And with Pettis, he's already shown multiple times that chin isn't the most reliable. Now, there still is a 12-year age gap, but honestly, Chris Cariaso has the better chin here. The main thing that the age difference is going to help with Pettis is, at 22, he's going to be, a little more dynamic, a little more versatile. He's going to be quicker, more explosive. I expect him to dart in and out. I expect his conditioning to be on point, but Cariaso should be fine there as well. He's really never had a problem with gassing in fights. But overall, in terms of a pure striking ability, I think Cariaso is going to be able to hold his own with Pettis on the feet. He does a good job of mixing up his kicks. He does a good job of hiding those kicks so they're not telegraphed, that he just kind of mixes them right in with his combinations. So if any of those connect with Pettis, Pettis could definitely go out, or at least get hurt enough that Cariaso could press forward and look for a finish. Now, in terms of the ground game, Cariaso has a decent ground game, but it's limited, and I think, honestly, if it goes to the canvas, it's Sergio Pettis' world here. He's got a little bit better wrestling. He was a decent amateur wrestler, although he did jump into MMA before, getting any collegiate experience. And Pettis has a really good offensive jiu-jitsu game as well. Even if put on his back, if he's in top, I expect Pettis to be the one in control here if it does go to the ground. But Cariaso does have good defense on the ground for the most part. I mean, unless he's fighting Demetrius Johnson. And Sergio Pettis is not Demetrius Johnson. So honestly, what we're looking for here is to see how Sergio's responded to that last fight. Because, he was looking good before getting put away. And what Cariaso's got left after getting thrown to the wolves in his last two fights. If he's, still going to buckle down and keep chugging along. Because at 34 years old, he's getting a bit, up there in age for a flyweight. Most guys, you're not going to see them at that age. So we're going to see what Cariaso's got left. I don't have a ton of confidence in him at this point, but he has faced significantly better competition than Sergio Pettis. So there is a decent chance that he could still win this fight just with that veteran savvy ability. And Sergio, we're still not quite sure what to know about this guy. He still is just so young, and he could still improve drastically, but there is kind of a peak. There is a ceiling with him based on the chin, because, you're going to get hit in this sport. And if you can't handle being hit, if you can't stay conscious when you get hit, that's a problem. So I'm picking Sergio, but there is not much confidence. And honestly, Chris Cariaso could absolutely pick this one up. But my pick is going to be Sergio Pettis. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Adriano Martins, who is 27-7, taking on Islam Makhachev, who is 12-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
This one, really tough one to set a line on, honestly. I opened at -120 Makhachev, -120 Martins. I know that a lot of you guys have been listening to the Oddscast know that I'm a fan of Martins, and I think he's been severely underrated throughout his career. Finally, he's getting some respect, I think, and especially in his win over Khabilov, because Khabilov was known to be one of the guys kind of in the upper tier again in the lightweight division, almost on the brink of a title shot. Obviously, that loss to Martins kind of set him back a little bit here. And Martins does pick up that momentum along the way, and I think he definitely picked up some respect along the way as well, which he deserves, because Martins is a beast, honestly. He's very strong on the feet. He has a tremendous amount of power in his hands, in his feet. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He actually proved that in his last fight with his wrestling ability. I mean, he's hard to take down, and he actually has pretty good takedowns in his own right. He has the BJJ to go along with it, so he's a southpaw as well. Should mention that. Martins is just a tough out. I mean, very underrated. Again, it's unfortunately because he is getting to that point where I think maybe even though mentally, physically, in some ways he's at the best point of his career he's ever been, he is 33. So we could see a little bit of a decline coming soon for Martins as well. But the way he's been performing recently, I mean, minus that Cerrone fight where he just got caught with that head kick, he's been great. He's a tough out. He deserves to be considered in the top tier group at 155, but it's a tough fight for him because Makhachev, even though, he's only had one official fight in the UFC, he looked great in that fight for sure. I think Makhachev against Kuntz is actually, I mean, a lot of people might not know that Kuntz is a very difficult, unorthodox, tough out. Makhachev kind of ran right through him. So I know a lot of people might not be as impressed, but that was a pretty impressive win, to be honest with you. And then again, if you look back even before his UFC debut, I mean, the guy has faced some decent competition throughout his career, even though he hasn't been in the UFC for those fights. It's not bad. I mean, his resume is not weak exactly either. So Makhachev, again, we should mention that he also trains with Khabib and his dad. So that actually helps. And, he's training with one of the best lightweights in the world. A lot of people believe Khabib is the next lightweight that's going to, obviously he has a win over the current lightweight champion Dos Anjos, and a lot of people believe he's going to end up holding that belt here soon. So he trains with that beast as well. He's got to have a little bit more confidence by doing so. He knows that obviously Khabib, is one of the better lightweights out there, period. So he has a lot of the same attributes Khabib does as well, because Makhachev is actually a wrestler, grinder in his own right. His stand-up game is actually pretty solid, though. I think his stand-up game is better than Khabib's, to be honest with you. He has heavy hands, throws with some solid power when he does come forward and throw as well. Decent movement on the feet. His takedowns are very slick, utilizes judo throws even as well. On the ground, he's pretty smooth. He's got good jiu-jitsu and good ground and pound. His clinch game is impressive as well on the feet. He uses everything: elbows, dirty boxing, uppercuts, a little bit of everything. And his weapon of choice does seem to be a little bit more so of the elbows and the sneaky uppercuts as well. Now, his kicking game is also on point. I mean, it's decent. You can't underestimate his kicks because he mixes those in as well. So Makhachev is definitely a very well-rounded, versed fighter with that wrestling background. So this is going to be an extremely close fight because I think both these guys are talented every aspect, in every aspect of this fight, period, across the board. So I'm expecting a very competitive fight. But honestly, Makhachev is a little bit younger. I think Makhachev is going to be able to honestly keep a little bit of a higher pace because Martins at times does get a little bit he doesn't perform or he doesn't stay as active as you'd like to see. He tends to slow down a little bit, and his inactivity might hurt him in a fight against Makhachev. And I don't think Martin's going to have a tremendous amount of success, getting takedowns in this fight either. So I think this fight is going to go back and forth in every aspect of the game. The striking will go back and forth. I think Martin's is the more dangerous striker here, but I think Makhachev is actually going to be a little bit more active throughout. So I'm leaning slightly towards Makhachev. I think that he is a very talented prospect. At only age 23, the scary thing is he's only going to get better. I mean, his UFC debut was exactly that, a debut. So just imagine when this guy does get comfortable in the UFC, which is going to be a few fights from now. And them matching him up with a guy like Martin's right away tells you that the UFC is definitely very high in this guy as well. They think that he's talented. They think that he's able to make some noise and possibly move up the rankings. And with a win over a guy like Martin's, it definitely puts him in a great spot to do so. So I'm going to pick Makhachev. I think that he does have some talent, and it's going to be a close fight, but I do lean his way slightly because of mainly activity.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were really surprised that Martins was able to pick up that last win. He's facing a similar fighter here against Islam Makhachev, but I think this time around, Makhachev presents a lot more threats. Martins is still a very dangerous fighter, and open space. He has a nasty head kick. He can put anybody out with that. He has good power on the feet, and surprisingly, he actually went in there and took down his Russian Dagestani opponent in his last fight. And I think nobody was expecting that, even me. And this time around, I don't see him being able to do that. The cat's kind of out of the bag that he might try some takedowns against Makhachev. And Makhachev, I think, in my opinion, is a much better overall wrestler. He's very well rounded. He has that, elite level sambo skills. He has the ability to score trips. He can, toss his opponent with judo. He can just do regular takedown, single, double. I mean, his wrestling is on point. And it's not just the wrestling. He's not a one-dimensional fighter. Makhachev is actually very dangerous when the fight gets close on the feet. He has good uppercuts in the clinch. When he's close, he can throw good elbows. He can step in with some powerful hooks. He has overhand rights. I mean, he's got the whole thing. And Makhachev also, has decent kicks. He's still working on those. But, I mean, overall, this guy is a very complete, very polished fighter. And that's why he's getting thrown in here already, because Martins is, a borderline top 15 UFC lightweight. And if Makhachev wins, honestly, he should be ranked. That's how impressive he has been already in just one fight. Now, obviously, Leo Kuntz is way further down the totem pole than somebody like Adriano Martins. But I think Makhachev is in a good spot here. I mean, he's 9 years younger than Martins, and I expect him to be very aggressive because Makhachev should have the advantage on the inside when they're standing. He should have the advantage on the ground. Even though Martins is an elite ground fighter, Martins is just not quite as good with his wrestling, even though he, is capable of some takedowns. I think he's going to lose out the wrestling battle, and Makhachev should be able to avoid any real submission trouble against Martins as well. So really, Martins' best shot at this fight is to land some big, heavy kicks at distance, or maybe to step inside with some powerful hooks. And I think the second he starts stepping inside, that's where this fight is going to get ugly for him. So I'm really high. I'm buying this Russian hype. And I think the only reason Makhachev isn't a bigger favorite right now is because not enough people know about him. So I'm picking Islam Makhachev as well. Now kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Rose Namajunas, who is 3-2, taking on Angela Hill, who is 2-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Namajunas minus 350, the comeback on Hill plus 250. And right now it is Rose Namajunas minus 265 and Angela Hill plus 225. So a little bit tighter with the dog action coming in on Angela Hill. I know that Hill, same thing with Tecia Torres actually in her last fight. I mean, I opened it a little bit higher for Tecia and everybody was coming in on Hill early on at first. And of course, even though Hill is game and she's the type of person that I think obviously from the Ultimate Fighter is getting some popularity, some respect. I mean, she has tremendous striking on the feet. I think she's one of the most dangerous, female strikers at 115 for sure. And she's a good fighter. It's just matchups, I think, are tough for her. I mean, the UFC are really not doing her many favors. I mean, in my opinion, Hill needs to really work on her ground game, which has been working on for sure. Her takedown defense, her grappling overall. That's where she's missing, and that's where she's a little bit more weak compared to some of these fighters. And in this spot here against Namajunas, she's going to be in a disadvantage there as well. But my concern is I would think that they would match Hill up a little bit differently, even though Tecia Torres isn't really known for her ground game. In this spot, it's going to be a little bit different. So I was thinking they would match Hill up a little bit easier. But I mean, having, again, back-to-back Tecia Torres and Namajunas is doing absolutely no favors for Hill. Namajunas, on the other hand, I mean, she's obviously a very talented fighter. She got her popularity, went to an all-time high. I mean, she's always been popular. A lot of people have always thought good of Namajunas for sure. She's a talented fighter, has a little bit of everything, has that it factor as well. Has the looks, has a skill set, has the positive attitude, everything. She's marketable. There's a lot of good things to like about her, and especially that she is a finisher. I mean, she's capable of knocking people out. She's capable of winning fights by submission. If you watch her on the show, The Ultimate Fighter, she performed magnificently, really. I mean, that loss to Esparza to some people was really a surprise. I mean, a lot of people in that fight were actually coming in on Namajunas against Esparza, and then the line kind of came back down a little bit. But that's how confident they were. Even against a talented wrestler like Esparza, they were coming in and taking Namajunas. Now, of course, she has lost some of that respect since that fight, and now Hill is getting some more respect, so she's closing the gap a little bit. But stylistically, even though I think it'll be a competitive fight, especially on the feet, it'll go back and forth a little bit, and you gotta kind of consider Hill having the more technical advantage in this spot, even though Namajunas on the feet can definitely hang with her and actually maybe even have more success. So that's yet to be determined, but on the ground is where it's going to matter for Namajunas, and I know that she knows that that's the way she beats Hill as well. So I think she does get a takedown, even if she struggles or not. She gets the fight to the floor eventually. And once it's on the floor, I mean, Rose is slick enough that I think she will get the job done and finish this fight by submission. If not, if it hits the scorecards, it'll probably be a very competitive fight. So I do understand why those out there are thinking that Hill might have some advantages as a dog at that price. But I still think that Namajunas will get the W here, and I think it's going to be her ground game that does it. So a good fight. Excellent matchmaking, surprisingly, because like I said, I thought they would kind of go the other way with this and give maybe Namajunas an easier fight and then not match Hill up as drastic. But it is what it is. I do think Namajunas is going to get the W here and probably get back on track and maybe work to another potential title shot.
Yeah, this is just a tough matchup here for Angela Hill. Now, on the feet, I actually think that she'll not only be able to hold her own, but she could beat Rose Namajunas there. Angela has some really powerful strikes, good punching power, and in the clinch, she throws good elbows and knees. I mean, she can be devastating there. I'm just not sure Rose wants to stand and bang the whole fight, and most people won't against Angela. The big difference here in ability is I think Rose is a little bit better in pure open space from distance. She has a lot of dynamic, flashy, kicking attacks, but where Rose is at her best is when she's on the inside and when she can get that fight to the ground. She has a very good ground game, very good submission ability. She can submit you just about any way. She has really good arm attacks. So I think she's going to be extremely aggressive in trying to get this fight to the ground. And unless Angela Hill clips her with a knee or something on the way in, then I think Rose gets this fight to the ground and probably finishes it at some point just because she is so aggressive with her submissions. I mean, she has good arm bars, really good kimuras. I mean, you saw it on the show. She was able to tap out some pretty good fighters. Randa Marcos and Joanne Calderwood are pretty top notch, and she was just able to run right through them. And I think, Angela, she's a good fighter, but I just don't like this matchup unless this fight stays standing. If it's in pure stand-up, if Angela can close the distance and, work her over on the inside, on the feet, then she could win this fight. It just depends if Rose is able to get this fight to the ground or not. It's not like she's a dynamic wrestler, but, I mean, she could do anything. She could pull guard, whatever, and I can see it going to the ground at some point. It's just, if it does stay standing, Angela's going to have, some opportunities here. Hill is a good striker. She has a really good amount of power. And I mean, that UFC debut against Emily Kagan, I think, spoke volumes about her ability. And the fact that Tecia Torres primarily just wanted to take the fight to the ground against her speaks even more. So I don't expect Rose to keep this fight on the feet for very long. And when it does go to the ground, I think Rose either ends up winning a decision or probably more likely than not ends up getting a submission at some point. So Hill will probably be on the defensive for the most of this fight, and I expect Rose to pick up a pretty convincing victory here. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Alan Jouban, who is 11-3, taking on Albert Tumenov, who is 15-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Tumenov, minus 230, the comeback on Jouban, plus 170. And right now it's Tumenov actually coming in at minus 250. The comeback on Jouban is plus 210. So line margins tighten up a little bit. There was some early action coming in on Jouban, and the line dropped to under 2-1 at one point, and then it kind of climbed back up to where it's at now. So there is two-way action on this fight. Both of these guys are definitely known for their striking ability. Both of them have a tremendous amount of knockout power. This should be a great fight. I mean, this is definitely a hand-friendly fight because both these guys come to fight. They like to stand and bang, even though they do have more skill than that. I mean, they're capable of taking the fight to the floor and surviving on the ground and doing some good things on the ground as well. But make no mistake again, that's not the way these guys go at it. They're going to stand and bang for the most part because I think they could kind of neutralize each other out as far as takedown game goes. And I think they prefer to stand and bang. They both basically are confident enough that they think they can knock anybody out. And that's what we're going to see here. We're going to see a firefight. The question mark here to me is Jouban's chin. I know that he's only officially been knocked out once in his career, but he has been rocked, it seems, in almost every fight, especially in the UFC thus far. And that's not a good thing when you're fighting a guy like Tumenov. He's just a talented striker. He's got nasty knockout power, of course. And, I mean, he could just do it in so many different ways. He's unorthodox. He's precise with his striking as well. And, again, he has got that power. So the problem with Jouban is if he gets clipped like he has in the past against a guy like Tumenov, which is going to be the best striker he's faced, especially in the UFC thus far, it's not going to be a good thing for him. So I do think that Tumenov is going to be able to do some damage on Jouban, and eventually he's probably going to put him out. If the fight does hit the scorecards, I'm sure it'll be competitive. Jouban's going to make a case. He's going to end up doing some damage along the way as well because, I mean, he's just a talented striker as well. I mean, he can mix things up with his kicking game. Again, with his hands are great as well. He is a southpaw, so he's going to have a different look and feel to him as well. Tumenov has to adapt and kind of, adjust to that style as well. So they're going to be banging, but I do think Tumenov is a little bit more stable, in my opinion, as far as chin toughness goes. And I think that he is the better striker in this matchup as well. And I don't think Jouban even has an advantage over Tumenov on the ground. So across the board, I think Tumenov gets the check marks here. And even though Jouban is definitely a dangerous striker that you have to respect, I still think Tumenov is probably the more dangerous striker and the more capable striker. So I am going to lean with him. I think he gets the job done here. And unfortunately for Jouban, I think he's going to suffer a loss in this fight.
Yeah, this is an awesome fight. Both guys are such incredibly powerful strikers and dangerous strikers that I am almost certain that somebody's getting knocked out. Although, hell, we thought that was going to happen the last time when Jouban faced Dwyer. I thought that fight was not going to go the distance, and it somehow miraculously did, even if they did hurt each other multiple times in the process. The biggest difference between Jouban and Tumenov, as Nick mentioned, is chin strength. Tumenov has taken a few decent shots in his UFC career, although he hasn't faced nearly as dangerous as strikers as Jouban, although they do have a common opponent in Dwyer, who Tumenov was able to put away in a minute. But I do think that Jouban's chin strength is questionable. He has not been knocked out in the UFC, but that first fight against Basinski, he almost got put out. He got hurt real bad. That last fight against Dwyer, he got hurt. And then even the Warlley Alves fight, he, got stunned a little bit. So, and none of those guys, in my opinion, have even half the power of Tumenov. Tumenov has that just one-hitter quitter fight-ending ability that he can put you away at any moment, both with his fists and with his heavy hands. So I think if this fight stays standing, and it probably will because neither guy really uses the ground that much, then at some point Tumenov is probably going to connect because he has a lethal left hook and he has a really, really nasty head kick. Now, Jouban, he's no slouch. He's going to be very slightly taller and longer. He needs to work that outside game. He has a little bit more of a dynamic overall striking game, but Tumenov is just a little bit tighter, a little bit crisper, and he packs just a wallop with his strikes. And I think if these guys are trading blow for blow, it's going to be Jouban that goes down. So I expect this fight to be extremely entertaining for however long it lasts, but I expect Tumenov to be standing at the end. So my pick is going to be Albert Tumenov. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Yair Rodríguez, who is 6-1, taking on Dan Hooker, who is 12-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Rodríguez, minus 230, the comeback on Hooker, plus 170. And right now, looking over at the line of 5 dimes, it has increased for Rodríguez. It's minus 290 now. The comeback on Hooker is plus 245. So strong support for Rodríguez. He's starting to finally get a little bit of respect as well. I mean, he's a talented fighter. Obviously, he won the Ultimate Fighter show as well, so he has that on his resume. And then after the Ultimate Fighter, coming in and making his what would be his official UFC debut against Charles Rosa, he looked great there as well, because Rosa's a tough out. So I think a lot of people were wondering how good Rodríguez, or what kind of improvement he would make, especially against a guy that's a tough out like Rosa. And he looked, like I said, really good in that fight, especially his stand-up game, throwing so many strikes unorthodox. Yair is just one of those guys that, again, he's very talented everywhere. He's wild in aggression, which is kind of concerning at times defensively, but overall, his stand-up game's on point because he has power to go along with speed and that unorthodox striking ability that he could catch you with either hand, either leg, spinning attacks, all sorts of stuff. So he's funky on the feet in a good way. And then on the ground, of course, his submission game's on point as well. You get him on his back, he could submit you. He looks for arm bars, triangle chokes. He's definitely savvy everywhere the fight takes place. So I think Rodríguez is a talented fighter. And again, another spot where honestly Rodríguez is actually going to continue to improve. He's still developing his MMA game. He's been getting better and better. Now he's got some confidence over a solid win again with Rosa. So Hooker, his opponent, on the other hand, you can say a lot of the same things. I'm not sure if he's quite up to the level of Rodríguez right now, even though Rodríguez is a little wild. And again, Hooker might be more technical at some spots. I still think that Rodríguez have some advantages over this fight. But Hooker overall, I mean, he's a very talented fighter as well. His win over Hyoki, even though he was losing that fight when he did end up landing that head kick, he was probably on his way to losing a unanimous decision there against Hyoki. Hey, a win's a win, and he pulled out a kick where he had to, so you got to give him credit for that. Against Blanco, the fight before that, he was game there as well. I mean, even though Blanco deserved to win that fight, Hooker still hung in there against a very powerful, explosive fighter like Blanco, and he was giving it back to him. I mean, he had Blanco on the ropes there quite a few times. I mean, just backing him up in his aggression. Hooker looked pretty good. And of course, his debut against Entwistle, he fought a very talented submission artist, and he was able to not get submitted. In fact, he ended up finishing that fight in impressive fashion by TKO himself. So Hooker is another one of these guys that's fairly young. At age 25, he's going to continue to improve his game now. With the quality win over Hyoki, he's going to have a lot of confidence coming into this fight as well. So he's going to be, I think, a little bit more competitive than most people are expecting. Again, it's Rodríguez, I think, is just a little bit more overall powerful, and he's a little bit more dangerous, and I think he's going to be having a little bit more success anywhere this fight takes place. But I think Hooker probably has a little bit of a cardio edge in this fight over Rodríguez, because Rodríguez does tend to fade as the fight goes on. Now, of course, a lot of that is because of the way the fight played out last time in different situations Rodríguez got in. It probably wore him out a little bit quicker, so his cardio might be a little bit better in this fight against Hooker. But that being said, there's still some question marks there. And again, with the inexperience or the experience level Rodríguez has right now is constantly growing, I think he needs to be tested. He needs to go to deep waters a little bit more often to get a little bit more of that confidence and a little bit more of that durability that he needs to go a steady 3 and not kind of fade. So there's some question marks with the Rodríguez for sure, but as far as talent level goes and ability here against Hooker, he should have the edge. So I am going to pick Rodríguez. I do think he probably beats Hooker. He could end this fight in impressive fashion, maybe catches a submission along the way, maybe knocks Hooker out, but it is going to be pretty competitive, and I think Hooker's going to show up and he's going to be game as well. So based on the betting action, and everybody seems to be parlaying and betting Rodríguez, there's not as much action coming in right now as reported by the sportsbooks on Hooker right now. And that's scaring me a little bit. Maybe people are underestimating Hooker a little bit too much. But that being said, I do see it, and I can understand Rodríguez winning this fight, so I am going to pick him to win as well.
In my film study for this fight, honestly, the biggest thing that stood out was Dan Hooker's really, really poor striking defense. I mean, he was getting clipped at a pretty high pace in the Blanco fight, and especially in the Hyoki fight. I mean, he was well on his way to losing that Hyoki fight before he landed that head kick. Now, granted, he'd landed the head kick before multiple times in that fight, and Hyoki had just kind of caught it and used it to take him down, and eventually he just landed it solidly enough on the head that was able to pick up the win. So, he at least was learning through that fight. But my problem with Hooker is he does not use very good striking defense. He doesn't use very good movement. A lot of the times he'll just move straight backwards when his opponent presses forward. And I think they could get him in some big trouble here against Rodríguez. Rodríguez is an extremely flashy, extremely dynamic striker. This guy will throw, jumping hook kicks and you name it, crazy spinning kicks. he has such a crazy arsenal of attacks that you are not going to be able to prepare for properly. The only real way to defeat that kind of crazy, sloppy, wild attack is to stay composed and get some takedowns. And while Hooker has good defense on the ground, he's able to avoid Ian Entwistle's heel hooks. He was able to keep Hatohioki from picking up a finish on the canvas. He doesn't do a ton offensively unless he can get in top position and start dropping some elbows or something. But overall, he's not a great ground fighter. So I would expect if this fight goes to the canvas that Rodríguez would be the one in control, or at least be the one on the attack. And I think Hooker would just be forced to play defense and he'd be losing the ground. And on the feet, Hooker does have some power. I mean, those head kicks are nasty. He is a southpaw, I believe, and he can land a really good left head kick. So Rodríguez will have to be careful for that. But for the most part, I expect Rodríguez to be controlling on the feet as well. I mean, he is just so explosive and dynamic and crazy on the feet that I expect him to be overwhelming Hooker a little bit. So I just think this is a bad spot for Hooker. He doesn't have very good ability to avoid a lot of these crazy attacks that Rodríguez is going to be throwing at him. And unless Rodríguez tires himself out by just going too hard, too fast in this fight, I expect Rodríguez to get the better of Hooker here and end up picking up the win. But, make no mistake, Rodríguez is still a work in progress. He's putting in good time moving to Chicago and training with Izzy Martinez and those guys, but he still isn't, completely refined yet. So this could be, Hooker playing spoiler if Rodríguez, walks into something like, Uriah Faber against Mike Brown with like a spinning back fist right into a hook. So we'll see what happens, but I expect Rodríguez to pick this win up, and I expect him to take advantage of Daniel Hooker's poor striking defense. Now, moving on to the main event of the preliminary card, we have a flyweight contest between Joseph Benavidez, who is 22-4, taking on Ali Bagautinov, who is 13-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Benavidez minus 300, the comeback on Bagautinov plus 220, and right now over at 5 dimes, it is minus 335 for Benavidez, and Bagautinov is now minus plus 275. So a little bit more action coming in on Benavidez, not a big surprise. A lot of people believe that besides DJ, or even in fact, before Demetrius Johnson did win the title, a lot of people thought that it was Benavidez's division. He had it basically locked up, and he's definitely arguably the second best fighter in the weight class. I mean, I know that people throw Dodson in the mix as well. So Benavidez is definitely a talented fighter, always in talk of getting that title shot. Of course, he has faced Demetrius Johnson now twice, so that's kind of probably out of the question unless he does rack up a few quality wins here as well. And Bagautinov is another one of those guys that could do that for him. I mean, he gets a win under his umbrella, he'll be thrown right back in the mix as well. But Bagautinov is another guy that did fight for the title. So both these guys are kind of on that upper tier of the flyweight division, no doubt about it. And both these guys are similar in a lot of ways as well, because Bagautinov has a ton of power on the feet. I mean, he's capable of finishing the fight by knockout. He's got some decent wrestling takedowns as well, and he's got a submission game to go along with it. So he's a very complete fighter, very powerful fighter, very explosive fighter. A lot of good things about Bagautinov coming into this fight, and he matches up probably better than most are giving him credit for against a guy like Benavidez here in this fight. And I think actually it'll be tough because Benavidez has to be careful. He has been knocked out. Of course, that was again to Demetrius Johnson, so you got to give him credit. I mean, Demetrius Johnson's just a special fighter right now. He's just off the charts at how good his ability is. So you got to give, that's the only time that he's really got clipped and knocked out like that. But he has been rocked in the past, and Bagautinov has a ton of power. So if he does walk into one of those big, powerful counter punches, he could be in some trouble here. But overall, the wrestling should be close. But I do give a slight edge to Benavidez here. I think he's the better ground fighter. I think he's a little bit more dangerous with his submission game. Of course, he is a southpaw on the feet as well. But what stands out to me the most is how quickly Benavidez is able to just latch onto your neck and just end things with a guillotine choke. I mean, he's one of those alpha male guys that just, I mean, he latches around your neck. It's pretty much over once he gets the grip and the technique in there to go along with it. So he does have advantage in this fight. I think Benavidez is going to be pushing a higher pace. He's going to be coming forward a little bit more as well. And of course, I was just talking about the knockout power for Bagautinov. I think that obviously Benavidez has that knockout power to go along with it as well. So he can win this fight, I think, by KO. He can win this fight, obviously, by submission as well, and he can win this fight on the card. So you got to lean towards Benavidez, but to be honest with you, again, where the line's going, this is probably going to be a little bit more competitive than most think, and it is a dangerous fight because Bagautinov does have that kind of crazy power that he could make things interesting there as well. So Benavidez should get the W here, but just be cautious out there. I know a lot of people are going to be wanting to throw Benavidez in a parlay thinking, all right, I mean, Bagautinov is a pretty good fighter, but he doesn't match up well against Benavidez. It should be a pretty sure win. I think it's going to be competitive. I think it's going to be close. I think you got to sweat it a little bit. So caution out there for Benavidez backers, but I do think he does get the W here more times than not. He should. He is the better fighter, so he should get the nod.
Yeah, this is definitely a great matchup between former title contenders. The big difference between these guys, honestly, is that Joseph Benavidez has been staying active. He's been going out there. He's been beating guys. And Bagoutinov's been on the sidelines waiting in suspension because he tested positive for steroids after that last fight against Johnson. Now, overall, they actually do have very similar skill sets. Both have a decent amount of power in their hands. Both are good grapplers. Although, honestly, I would say that Benavidez is a little bit more explosive. Benavidez is going to be the better submission threat. He has a really nasty guillotine choke. He can, work for some submissions from top position better than Bagautinov could. And I expect Benavidez to be a little bit better in terms of controlling the fight if it goes to the ground. So I think Benavidez is just a little bit better in all areas. The only real difference here is that maybe Benavidez doesn't have quite the chin. Bagautinov has taken some good shots in fights. I mean, he lasted all 5 rounds. His first time against Demetrius Johnson didn't really get in trouble at all, even with all the knees and everything Johnson was throwing in the clinch. And, Benavidez did get put out pretty quickly by Johnson in their rematch. So Bagautinov, with his power, there is always going to be the threat that he could finish this fight if he connects with something really solid. But overall, I expect Benavidez to be the one in control, to be the one that is kind of dictating how this fight takes place. And of course, one thing you have to consider is, was Bagautinov on the juice in those previous fights where he was on his way to earning that last title shot? So how is he going to perform now that the UFC has those stricter drug testing policies? Is he going to be the same fighter? So that is something you really have to take into consideration here. So, and I'm definitely going to do that. So with the long layoff and with the uncertainty in Bagautinav's performance, you got to lean Joseph Benavidez. He's the number one guy that's not named Demetrius Johnson in the flyweight division for a reason. He's earned it, and I think he picks this win up. It should be a competitive fight, but I expect Benavidez to be on the winning end at the end of the day. So he is my pick. Now moving on to the women's bantamweight division to kick off the UFC 192 main card, we have Jessica Eye, who was 11-3 with 1 no contest, taking on Julianna Peña, who is 7-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Peña, -180 to come back on Eye, +140, and right now, action has been steady coming in on Peña. She's -245. The comeback on Eye is +205. So no respect for Eye at this point. I know that Peña is definitely a very talented fighter. She's got a lot of hype behind her. I mean, from the Ultimate Fighter, obviously as well. I mean, champion there, and she looked good on the show as well. She's been phenomenal. She has that style of fighting where she's very aggressive. She likes to take the fight to the ground. Once she gets on the ground, I mean, her ground and pound is nasty. She looks to finish the fight. That's the good thing about Peña is she's a finisher. I mean, she's an aggressive finisher, which does leave some openings at times and can definitely cause some problems against a good, capable striker like Jessica Eye. But overall, her aggression does some wonders for her because she's got technique to back it up, and she's got good fight IQ to go along with it. So Peña is a very difficult out, very talented fighter, a lot of hype around her, and they're matching her up with somebody like Jessica Eye right now, which is a little bit surprising. But that being said, a lot of people out there realize that Jessica Eye is coming off of a very difficult fight. I mean, her fight with Tate, she was looking really good early on in that fight. It looked like she was on her way to just dominating Tate, honestly, on the feet. And then she got clipped by a big punch, and that turned the whole complexion of the fight around. Tate was able to get on top and then, of course, win unanimous decision. Now, you got to give credit to Eye because she was able to hang in there and she showed a lot of toughness. But the problem is, I mean, her ground game got her beat, and that's exactly what Peña is going to come after here as well. She's going to come after Eye, look to take her down, look to control her on the floor, and look to probably finish. I mean, as aggressive as Peña is, that's definitely going to be the case here. But that being said, again, I think Jessica Eye is a very talented fighter. She knows that her last fight didn't go so well. She's looking to rebound. She's putting in the work to prove her takedown defense a little bit and to tighten up that defense a little bit as well, which obviously needs tightening up and improved on. And on the feet, she is the better striker here. So if her takedown defense holds up, even though Peña has that aggression that I was mentioning on the feet, I think that she leaves enough openings that I can definitely find her points and her spots to do some damage along the way. Ai is typically not really known for her knockout power, but I think she's a little bit underestimated there as well. She has enough zap in her punches that she can finish a fight, especially if the person's defensively flawed. So the keys to this fight is really if I can keep it upright, and if her defense did get tightened up a little bit, she needs to move that head, move around the octagon a little bit better as well, and try to avoid the big power that Peña is going to be throwing at her. That being said, I think she probably does it. Now, of course, I'm going to mention this as well. I am biased. I'm friends with Jessica Ai, so it's hard for me to pick against her, honestly, and I know this is an extremely tough fight for her, but I do think she's going to bounce back, and I want to believe that she is going to be able to fend off Peña's takedowns in her ground game and keep it upright and win this fight, probably on the scorecards by decision.
Yeah, I completely disagree. I think she's coming back way too quickly after getting dropped twice by Miesha Tate. And Jessica Ai is a little bit flawed right now. I mean, on the feet, in open space, she's terrific. She has good technique. She's a good athlete. She moves well. She has good footwork. And she's able to land consistently with her jab and straight punches. Her biggest problem is she doesn't really pack a lot of power, so her opponents really don't have much to fear on the feet. And she doesn't have a very good chin. Honestly, as one of the women in the bantamweight division where they don't have a lot of power, she's already been hurt or dropped on three separate occasions already in her UFC career. So I think with somebody that's as athletic and powerful and dangerous as Julianna Peña, Ai's going to have to be careful. Now, Peña isn't a world beater on the feet. In her last fight, I mean, she could not wait to get in her opponent Dudeva's face and just start winging haymakers. And if any of those land against Jessica Ai, she could potentially put her out or at least drop her and hurt her. So I expect that Jessica Ai has to be extremely careful on the feet just because of the power and tenacity that Peña throws. If any of those clip her, she could put her down. And if she goes down, that's where the real problem lies, because Peña is one of the most dangerous ground fighters in the entire women's division, maybe other than Ronda Rousey. Peña has ferocious submission ability. She can, get that triangle choke. If she's on her back, she can get arm bars. She can get rear naked chokes. And then if she can get top position, she is extremely heavy, has great hips, is able to stay on top despite, what most of her opponents trying to buck her off. And she drops ferocious ground and pound. That last fight against Dudeva, I mean, she was pummeling her. Absolutely brutal, from top position with punches, elbows, just ferocious, would not stop, extremely tenacious. And she just was able to weather her opponent down and pick up the TKO win in the first round. If Jessica Ai gets stuck on her back, especially if she gets mounted, Peña could finish this fight. She is that tenacious on the feet. So honestly, while Jessica Ai is a good talent, unless she can keep this fight at distance and work the jab and work her range, I think she's going to be in a lot of trouble. And I just can't see her doing that for 3 rounds, even if she was looking good in that first couple minutes against Miesha Tate. It's just, I don't think she can keep that up, that whole pace for 3 full rounds before she starts to slow down and her defense goes down. So my pick is going to be Julianna Peña. Now moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Shawn Jordan, who is 18-6, taking on Ruslan Magomedov, who is 13-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Magomedov minus 140. The comeback on Jordan, even money was my opening line. And right now, looking over it 5 times again, it's Magomedov minus 155. The comeback on Jordan is plus 135. So a little bit more action coming in Magomedov's way. Nothing significant, and the line margins have tightened up a little bit as well. I'll tell you what, man, I've underestimated Jordan throughout his career quite a bit. I know what he brings to the table, and of course he's training with American Top Team, and of course he had before he was previously training with Jackson and crew as well. So he's had some decent training and decent experiences throughout his career, no doubt about it. And he's had a pretty successful career even before he came to the Octagon. I mean, he's one of these heavyweights that a lot of people were expecting good things about. Of course, he's got even a collegiate background in football, LSU or whatnot as well. So he's an athletic guy, very fast, very powerful. for a heavyweight for sure. He's a southpaw on the feet as well. He has one of my favorite things about Jordan on the feet is he's got a sneaky good uppercut that he throws. I mean, his timing is good with it. His accuracy is good with it. And he's got a ton of power to go along with it too. I think he's getting a little bit better, meaning that he's just becoming a little bit more steady. And my concern with Jordan, and it will be a concern here in this fight as well, because it always will be, but he is getting a little bit more steady is what I'm trying to throw at you here, is that chin. I mean, his chin has let him down in the past. His cardio at times was a little bit of a concern as well, but I think that he's kind of fixed a lot of those areas, and his chin's even seems to be holding up a little bit better as well. Now, you can't really fix a chin, but the last time he was knocked out was against Mitrione, and even though it was last year, he's had 3 successful fights in a row against guys that are known to be heavy hitters as well, and he's done successful in those fights as well, and he's not been knocked out. So I think that Jordan's chin might be a little bit better than I give him credit for at times, but against Magomedov, he's in for a tough fight despite all that. I mean, even if he doesn't get knocked out, Magomedov is one of these guys that is definitely a talented, hyped heavyweight as well. He is now training with AKA, so I think that's only going to help his overall game, and he's another talented heavyweight where you get a little bit of everything from him. I mean, he's got outstanding striking on the feet. He's long for the weight class. He's going to have a little bit of reach over Jordan in this fight as well. He knows how to use it. I mean, he's very technical with the striking game. He's got a little bit of power, probably a little bit underrated power. He's got decent wrestling and submission game to go along with it as well. And I think that he's just going to be the more active fighter throughout this fight. So Jordan's not going to be able to put up with the pace. I think that the wrestling advantage, even though a lot of people might believe it goes to Jordan, I think that Magomedov, working with the crew over AKA, has definitely tightened that up a little bit as well. He's not going to be easy for Jordan to bully around. So if that's the case, Magomedov, I think, is going to be a little bit better in the clinch. I think he's going to be just a little bit better and a step ahead of Jordan everywhere in this fight, to be honest with you. And then in your back pocket, you have the fact that I do trust, even though Magomedov's chin is slightly concerned, especially with power that Jordan has. I mean, always heavyweights, you can't count knockout out. I mean, especially in the UFC at this level, if they do make it over to the UFC, obviously they're more than likely talented enough to finish a fight on the feet. And that's the case here with both guys. But I do have a little bit more faith in Magomedov's chin right now, even though he did get rocked, as I mentioned early on in this podcast, by Pesta. I think that he'll probably not get knocked out, and along the way he might knock Jordan out. And if it hits the scorecards, I do think he outpoints Jordan as well. So it is Magomedov's fight to win or lose. I think Jordan, again, he's come into his own. He's looked great recently, and you got to respect that. But I still think Magomedov is just a step ahead, and he's just a little bit better at this point. So I got to side with him.
Yeah, the big dynamic in this fight is size. Even though Shawn Jordan comes in near the heavyweight limit at about 260, Ruslan Magomedov is going to have a significant height and reach advantage in this fight, and he uses it pretty well. Magomedov is a very solid overall technical striker, and I expect him to use that jab, keep that pumped in Shawn Jordan's face, and just try to avoid letting Shawn Jordan get on the inside, because that's where Jordan's most dangerous. Jordan is a very powerful striker, has just extremely heavy hands. He can get inside, and he can land that right hand or left hand, and he can put just about anybody down. Even in his last fight, I mean, he showed how much of a crazy athlete he is with that, head kick knockout against Derrick Lewis. So, anything can come from Jordan because he is a terrific athlete despite coming in pretty heavy in most fights. So Magomedov's going to have to be on guard, but he's the type of fighter that is just so technical and controlling that usually he's able to just keep his opponent at bay, keep them frustrated, and he can win decisions. Now, Magomedov isn't the most powerful guy, but that being said, it's not like he's not throwing hard. And with Shawn Jordan, he does have a bit of a chin deficiency. And if Magomedov connects with something solid, he can still hurt Shawn Jordan. He could put him out. Jordan has been knocked out multiple times, and I would not be shocked to see Magomedov pick up a knockout victory. That being said, if Shawn Jordan gets inside and cracks him with something really heavy, Magomedov could get put down as well. I mean, he did get hurt by Pesta, so that is a slight concern, especially because Pesta isn't a very good striker. But then again, that was kind of a fluky kind of thing. So I expect Magomedov to be fully prepared for whatever Shawn Jordan brings. If this fight goes to the ground, Jordan would probably be in top position, but Magomedov has excellent takedown defense. So far, he's at about 90% takedowns defended. Granted that most of that was against Viktor Pesta, but still, I mean, he seems like he knows what he's doing there on the ground if you go back to his pre-UFC fight footage. Honestly, I think Magomedov is one of the better up-and-coming heavyweights in the UFC roster, even if he is just 28 years old. I mean, That's actually young in the heavyweight division, believe it or not. So I think Magomedov is going to control this fight, and I expect him to probably pick up a decision. And honestly, he could potentially walk away with a knockout as well if he's able to connect solidly with Jordan. So Magomedov is going to be my pick. Now dropping down to the light heavyweight division, we have Ryan Bader, who is 20-4 overall, taking on Rashad Evans, who is 24-3-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Evans opened minus 245, the comeback on Bader plus 175. And right now, over 5 times, it's Evans minus 160. The comeback on Bader is plus 140. So more action coming in on Bader. The line droppage actually surprising somewhat because, I mean, as far as hype and popularity and overall skill, I mean, Evans was widely regarded as the number 2 heavyweight behind Jon Jones. Of course, Cormier obviously can make a case for that right now. But that being said, that's how much respect Evans had. I mean, he had the explosiveness. He has the athleticism. He's got the speed. He's got the mental game. I mean, every aspect of the fight Evans has covered. I mean, he's got the experience. He's looked great throughout his UFC career. I mean, of course, he's had some setbacks at times, but overall, I mean, Evans has looked like the man, and especially dating back. I know it's been since I believe January of 2012, where he dominated Phil Davis. But I mean, to me, that was a very impressive performance. But the problem is with Evans, I mean, since that fight, I mean, he had that fight with Jon Jones. Of course, you can obviously kind of cut him a little slack for that loss, but his fight against Nogueira did sit bad with me because I think that I was expecting a lot more, like most of you guys out there that probably laid the price on Evans over Nogueira. I mean, just surprising how lackluster that performance was. And then, of course, that split decision over Henderson. And then he kind of had a gimme over Sonnen. I mean, stylistically, the way they matched up. So there's a lot of question marks behind Evans because he's been out now since 2013 with injuries, and he hasn't looked that great even before he got put out with injuries. So in my opinion, that's kind of a bad spot against a guy like Ryan Bader that's coming into this fight with an extreme amount of confidence. I mean, we're talking about somebody that they had neutral as far as, or a common opponent, I should say, and that is Phil Davis. And Bader was able to squeak by Phil Davis, a very competitive split decision type of fight. That was that type of fight really, but you could see why Bader got the nod in my opinion. I mean, I scored it that way as well, but it was one of those fights that different judges could have scored it either way. And where Rashad kind of dominated, Phil Davis and won clearly, Bader did struggle. So MMA math typically doesn't work. If you look at that, you got to kind of throw it out the window as well, because now the situation is a little bit different. If you're looking at the fight, I think Bader is better at this point, across the board than he once was, and he keeps on improving. Even though he just recently fought Davis, I think Davis is actually better than when he fought Rashad as well. So MMA math goes out the window. And if you're looking at the quality wins that Bader's had recently, he performed again very well against Davis. His OSP fight, that's a dangerous fight for a lot of people because OSP has so much power, so much explosive ability as well. And Bader was able to get the takedowns. He was able to survive when times got tough on the feet there as well. And he was able to just, show his toughness, his cardio, his conditioning, everything across the board and get that win. So that was impressive as well. I think Bader is really coming into his own. He's got knockout power on the feet, which could be dangerous for Rashad, because I think if people are looking at this fight, they're going to say, who's the more chinny guy? I think a lot of people are going to point to Bader because he has been knocked out a couple times. And of course, Evans' only knockout loss has come to Machida, but Evans has been rocked before, and Bader has a ton of power as well. So I don't necessarily think you could count out the fact that Bader has enough power in his hands to do some damage if he does clip Evans and maybe put him out there. He definitely has that. So it's a concern there if you're backing or laying a decent amount of juice on a guy like Rashad Evans coming back from that long layoff against another stylistic, what seems to be a tough matchup, because Bader is going to have the wrestling to probably neutralize things out here. And then on the hands or on the feet, he should have heavy hands enough to kind of keep Evans at least a little bit respectful on the feet as well. But Evans does have a little bit advantages in this fight overall. I mean, he has the speed factor. Again, I think he's the better overall fighter across the board, even in the cage wrestling, in the octagon. I think it kind of translates better. Evans is a smart fighter. He gets the takedowns. He's able to control his opponents. He's able to outpoint his opponents. His fight IQ at times is very good as well. And you just know what you're getting. He comes in shape usually, and he's a game fighter. So I see a lot of advantages pointing towards Evans. The one thing that bothers me is the time off. And if you're looking back at his career recently, he hasn't looked that great either. So this is good timing for Bader. I think he's catching Evans at a good spot, and it's a spot that he could actually pull off the W here. So it's going to be a close competitive fight. If it hits the scorecards, I think we're going to see another extremely close decision. And I'm going to lean with Bader, though. I think he's going to get the job done here. I think he's going to pull off the upset win. It's just the time off, everything, the situation regarding Evans. I'm just not that comfortable. So I have to lean a little bit more towards Bader. If this was a Rashad Evans that did not have the time off with the injuries and he was maybe more consistently, performing at a high level, then that'd be a different story. But for right now, I have to lean with my head and my gut, and it tells me that Bader's probably going to get this win.
This fight had taken place about 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it'd be Rashad Evans easy. I mean, I wouldn't even have to think twice about it. But that was a long time ago. Rashad Evans is getting up there in age. Ryan Bader, has really been performing well heading into this fight. I mean, he's not beating chumps. I mean, he's been going out there and beating guys that are top 10, top 15 opponents. And Rashad, in the meantime, is now 36 years old. He is always been relatively undersized in the light heavyweight division, and he's coming off of not just 1 but 2 knee injuries that have kept him out of action since November of 2013. So almost 2 full years. So he is going to be extremely rusty. And the second he got healthy, he had to jump right into a training camp. So how hard was he really able to go? Is he going to be there mentally? There's all kinds of questions right now about Rashad Evans, because in his prime, he was fantastic. The guy, it was explosive, quick, and very powerful. And, at times he could take things off and let his opponents dictate the pace too much, but he'd always made up for it with that athletic ability. And how much of that athletic ability is still going to be there at 36 years old and with 2 knee surgeries? So Ryan Bader, in the meantime, has been extremely active. He's been going out there. He's been, putting a whooping on people. He's been beating guys like Fejao, like Ovince St. Preux, like Phil Davis. And, he was scheduled to be fighting Daniel Cormier in what would have probably been a number 1 contenders fight before Cormier got a title shot. Honestly, in my opinion, it should be Ryan Bader in the main event because of his recent performances. And he's not, so he's jilted, he's extremely motivated, and I think he wants to come out here and try to make a statement. Now, in terms of Bader's skills, he does have some really good one-punch power, although sometimes his hand breaks, so he's not able to utilize it properly as the fight wears on. He does have some really good offensive wrestling. He's getting better in terms of being a more technical striker. He has a decent jab that he's been working on, and has some good control in fights. Now, is he going to be able to use all of that against Rashad? I don't know, because Rashad has some really good wrestling in his own right, and he's been able to stifle wrestlers in the past. So is he going to take away Bader's takedown game? I don't know, because Bader is very big, very strong, very explosive with his takedowns. He might be able to put Rashad down, although who knows if he'll be able to keep him down. I mean, hell, Tito was able to take Rashad down briefly. Now, on the feet, Rashad is going to be the quicker guy as long as his knees are still healthy and strong and back to what they were. But Bader should be able to hold his own on the feet in terms of power. I mean, if they're trading blow for blow, neither of them has a great chin. Although, honestly, Bader's is probably a little worse. I mean, he has been knocked out and hurt in multiple fights. I mean, he had Glover Teixeira on the ropes, and then he dropped his defenses a little bit trying to pursue the finish, and then he got clipped. So Rashad could definitely put him away. I mean, Rashad has some vicious power. If he connects solidly, he can put just about anybody out. And Bader would definitely be somebody that he can take out. But Rashad has been hurt too. And I think if Bader is aggressive enough, and if he lands something, he could put Rashad out. I mean, this fight, I think, is going to be really even. The big question mark is whether or not it goes to the ground or whether or not Bader can get it to the ground and stay in top, because both guys have some not just good collegiate backgrounds in wrestling, but they have very good MMA wrestling overall. So I think this fight's going to be very even. And the main thing that's scaring me is the fact that Rashad hasn't fought in 2 years. So I'm actually going to side with Ryan Bader here as the upset. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have Johny Hendricks, who is 17-3, taking on Tyron Woodley, who is 15-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Hendricks minus 260, Woodley plus 180 was the opener. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is Hendricks that got bet up to kind of a somewhat surprising number. Right now it's minus 340 for Hendricks. The comeback on Woodley is plus 280. And I'm saying that because I thought, honestly, the opener at 260, given the fact that both these guys are extremely good wrestlers, they should neutralize each other out a little bit. Both these guys have a ton of punchy power as well. I thought it was a fair price, but obviously I was wrong. And a lot of people have more confidence than I do in Johny Hendricks. Now, I realize that a lot of people believe that he actually won the second fight against Lawler as well, and he should still be, and he kind of is the uncrowned UFC welterweight champion. But that being said, I mean, that fight was pretty close either way, and Hendricks has had and is going to have competitive fights along the way. So I think sometimes we put a little bit too much stock and too much credit in certain fights, and I think that lines get kind of blown out of proportion. Now in this fight, I realized that people were going to see some advantages in Hendricks, and one of them is the kind of pace he pushes, and the other one is his chin. I mean, Hendricks has shown an outstanding chin along the way. I mean, his fights with Lawler, both of them, I mean, he took some punishment along the way. He held up nicely. He got rocked a little bit. He was even gassing and tired, and he's still getting hit, and he was able to survive, and he was okay. I mean, that shows you the toughness with Hendricks. I mean, I wish you could put his heart and his toughness and his chin in other bodies at times, because that's what some fighters lack. I mean, they have the skill, they just don't have that. Well, Hendricks has a little bit of everything. I mean, he has obviously the wrestling background, like we mentioned. He's got devastating punching power, and now he's getting a little bit more confident on his feet. He's even throwing kicks, which can be very powerful, low kicks that I'm referring to more than anything else. I mean, it's pretty impressive, the improvement of Hendricks. And again, he could be very possibly, with different judges sitting in those seats, the welterweight champion right now. So I understand the reasoning behind everybody kind of coming in on Hendricks, because Woodley typically, he's underperformed in certain spots, and against, when he does tend to take a huge step up in competition, it seems like he underperforms as well, where guys can kind of push the pace on him if he can't kind of control him with his wrestling or with that big power. If he can't land that one punch, then as the fight goes on, he typically struggles and he gets out decisioned by guys. So that could happen. He's also been knocked out. You know, it's back now in the Strikeforce days, so it's been a while since he got knocked out by Mark Court. But I think a lot of that was because it was a 5-round fight, and he started gassing along the way as well. So I think Woodley's chin is actually better than most people think here as well. But I mean, it's going to get tested with Hendricks' power. There's no doubt about that. As far as how they match up, though, I think it's going to be a pretty close and competitive fight, because even though Hendricks does have enough cardio, obviously he's proven it to go 5 rounds and be strong in 5 rounds. I still think he does tend to slow down a little bit and gas at times. He could just fight hard, still tired. So I think as the fight goes in round 2, round 3, a lot of people are expecting Hendricks to just kind of pick up the pace and just outwork Woodley. I think it's going to be pretty close and interesting. And then I do think that Woodley has a more explosive power on the feet. I mean, both these guys have devastating knockout power, so hard to say that one hits harder than the other. A lot of people would actually think that Hendricks might have a little bit more power, but I think the speed and explosiveness of Woodley is just a little bit better. So I think that Hendricks is going to have to be cautious, even though he has that granite chin that I was talking about, and you got to give him credit for that. I mean, Woodley's a type of fighter that, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised who he knocks out at welterweight. So at the price, it's kind of tough. I think that Hendricks is actually getting a little bit too much respect, and Woodley's probably getting rated here in this spot, honestly. Tough one. I have to lean a little bit more towards Hendricks, though, because of those factors that I pointed out. I do think he is going to be a little bit more active along the way.
This is an extremely compelling matchup between two guys that have a bit of history dating back to when they were in the Big 12 wrestling against each other. They did a controversial wrestling match. So Hendricks and Woodley, they don't like each other. They're both very talented. They both have excellent wrestling in the division, and they both have a ton of power on the feet. And the biggest difference between them, honestly, is the fact that Woodley is a little bit more of a dynamic striker. He can mix things up a little bit more. He's a little bit more just purely explosive, while Hendricks has a little bit of a better chin. I mean, that guy, his chin is made of granite. And Woodley, on the other hand, he has been hurt a little bit. He has been in some trouble in fights. He has been put out, by Nate Marquardt. So if Hendricks connects with that, big bomb of a left hand of his, he could put Woodley out. Now, that being said, this fight is extremely close. I don't expect wrestling to be a huge factor here, because I think it's going to neutralize. So we're going to be stuck with a stand-up fight, and I think that's what a lot of people are really excited to see, because both Hendricks and Woodley are extremely dangerous fighters in the pure stand-up. So I expect this fight to be extremely entertaining, a good dynamic, and honestly, it could be that first guy that lands that huge first shot, although maybe Hendricks can take a couple of those before something bad happens to him. Now, The one thing that is a bit of a concern for me, other than the fact that Woodley probably gets knocked out first if they're trading blow for blow, is the fact that Woodley has been controlled along the fence. A guy like Jake Shields was pursuing the takedown against him a lot in their fight and wasn't able to get it, but he was able to push him against the fence. And if Hendricks does decide to use that wrestling of his, and if Woodley can stuff the takedowns, he might just get stuck against the fence and clinched for up to 3 rounds. So that is my big concern on what could make this fight not as exciting as other people are hoping for. But I hope that doesn't happen. I hope this fight, they're just out in open space slugging it out. But you got to be at least a little bit cautious because sometimes Woodley isn't the best in terms of positioning and awareness. He's not realizing that he's potentially losing a round. So overall, I do think this fight's going to be extremely close, a lot closer than the betting odds currently indicate. So I'm going to side with Johnny Hendricks because of those mitigating factors. But again, I do think this fight is going to be extremely close. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have the UFC light heavyweight title on the line between current champion Daniel Cormier, who is 15-1, and challenger Alexander Gustafsson, who is 16-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Cormier minus 280, the comeback on Gustafsson plus 220, and right now it's Cormier minus 340, the comeback on Gustafsson is plus 280, so more action coming in Cormier's way. Another difficult one to set a line on, honestly, because obviously you know that more people are going to probably lean a little bit more towards Cormier just because of, the nature of the game. He's a standing wrestler. He hasn't lost a round before he fought Jon Jones, and that fight was actually competitive as well. So Cormier is an outstanding fighter. But, where to put it, considering that Gustafsson, a lot of people, again, believe that Gustafsson right now or before his knockout loss to Johnson was right behind Jon Jones. So it was Jon Jones 1, Gustafsson was right behind him because of that outstanding war that they had. And Gustafsson still to this date has given Jones his toughest challenge. But I think a lot of people are basing too much off of that fight. Gustafsson is an extremely talented fighter, and there's no doubt about that at all. But the problem is, I think people are still basing a little bit too much off that fight. He has length. He has good knockout power on the feet. He has a tremendous amount of skill on the feet as well. His wrestling is actually good. He's not an easy guy to take down. He's got good footwork, good movement, a lot of great things you can say about Gustafsson. That length is just ridiculous as well. So he's going to have some advantages for sure over Cormier in this fight. But the problem is, I think Cormier will close the gap, will get this fight to the ground. And on the ground, Cormier is going to have quite a big advantage. I know that Gustafsson has gotten better on the ground, but it's still not going to be up to par with the control factor. It's going to be so hard for Gustafsson to get Cormier off of him. And then I do believe that Cormier is also getting better in his submission game. He's been working for a while now on his grappling, and obviously he proved it against Anthony Johnson. Not a huge shock that he took Johnson's back and subbed him, but if he gets in that situation even against Gustafsson, I think he's capable of finishing the fight even on the ground. So this fight, I think even though there is some MMA math that can be used here as well, you got to throw this one out the window because I don't think it just matches up. These guys all match up with each other a little bit differently, and I think that Cormier will have success against Gustafsson. He will get the takedowns and he will do what he does best. So, it's dangerous if Cormier stays striking for sure. Gustafsson has a good clinch game as well. It's not going to be an easy night for Cormier by any means, but at the same time, he does have the advantage. So I think if Gustafsson can't survive on the ground with Cormier, that's fine, but Cormier will probably still win a decision if so. Gustafsson's best shot is knocking Cormier out. I'm not sure how confident I am in that. Look at what Anthony Johnson did. He almost had Cormier. He stunned him. He rocked him. He wasn't able to finish him at all. Cormier actually recovered quickly and was able to just get right back in the fight, and he was fine. And Anthony Johnson has crazy knockout power. So if Johnson wasn't able to finish him, doesn't mean Gustafsson won't, but I still think it's going to be hard for Gustafsson to finish him because Cormier has shown us that he's got a heck of a chin on him. So Gustafsson's best way to win this fight, I think, is by knockout, and I don't see him getting that knockout against Cormier. So you have to lean towards Cormier here in this fight.
Yeah, the UFC has been hyping up this fight, and the biggest thing is the mismatch in terms of height and reach between Cormier and Gustafsson. Cormier's given up at least 6 inches in height and a good solid at least 10 inches in reach. So if Gustafsson's able to use that, then he's going to be in decent shape, but I don't know if he's going to be able to use it. Everybody was talking about that in the Jon Jones fight against Daniel Cormier, but Jon Jones is such a crazy type of guy that he went right in Cormier's face and fought him in his own world, trying to beat him up in the clinch, and he was able to successfully do it and beat Cormier at his own game. Now, the big difference between Gustafsson and Cormier is Gustafsson doesn't have that ability to get inside and beat somebody like Cormier on the inside. I mean, he's a guy that needs to work from the outside. He has a good jab. He has a good striking ability, but he doesn't like it when people get in his face. I mean, he doesn't have a tremendous chin. He's been hurt in fights before, and he was knocked out by Anthony Johnson. Now, granted, Anthony Johnson has otherworldly power. I mean, Johnson sent Daniel Cormier reeling across the cage on the first strike that he threw in that title fight. So it's no surprise that Johnson was able to hurt Gustafsson and put him away. But against a guy like Cormier, I still think Cormier should be able to get inside against Gustafsson. He is an elite wrestler, an elite athlete, and an extremely accomplished grappler and wrestler. And I think he's going to get inside and throw Gustafsson around a little bit if he can get this fight to the ground, which he should be able to. Now, in terms of in the stand-up department, if Gustafsson can keep his distance, he'll be in decent shape. But I just don't think he can. Cormier can explode to the inside, and he does have some power. I mean, you saw it against Patrick Cummins. You saw it against Antonio Silva. He can end fights if he's able to connect. And he, even though he's undersized, even at light heavyweight, I mean, the guy was able to go up to heavyweight and beat up guys that were bigger than Gustafsson even. So I expect Cormier to be in fine shape here. And I think the biggest thing Cormier has going for him is, unless he's facing Jon Jones, I mean, he's the grinder. He's the guy that is going to wear you down. And then the second you start to fade, that's when he really turns it up a notch. And he just makes you quit in a lot of fights. And I think in a 5-round fight like this, Gustafsson did fade down the stretch against Jon Jones. I mean, he honestly won 2 of the first 3 rounds, in my opinion, and then ended up losing the championship rounds. So against a guy like Cormier, who I think is going to make this even uglier and grittier, then I think he can definitely wear Gustafsson down. And if he doesn't put away Gustafsson quickly, because Gustafsson is a slow starter, then I think Cormier can at least win a decision here just by staying in Gustafsson's face and wearing him down. So I expect this to be a gritty and entertaining slugfest, but I see Daniel Cormier walking out on top at the end and probably calling out Jon Jones, who was just not given jail time for his recent felony conviction. So my pick is going to be Daniel Cormier. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 192. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out this Friday night following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. Also, if you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMA Oddsbreaker homepage and you can sign up on the top right corner. We'll have either Nick Kalikis's or Mike James premium bets available. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dime Sportsbook and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.